Awesome. First of all, thank you so much for having me here. It's an honor to be presenting to all of you. Sounds like we've got current students, alumni, special guests in the room. Um, and my topic today, and first of all, thank you for the invite. I decided to center my talk today around alternative careers in medical illustration. So you might be thinking, what is that? How does that apply to me? I'll give you a little bit of background about myself and how I'm actually a very traditional medical illustrator. So kind of ironic that my career took me down this path. But I guess I'll start there. I'll give you a little bit of an intro. So my name is Shiz. I'm one of the co-founders of BioRender. And my background's actually in medical illustration at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. And sometimes I joke that if I had applied to the BMC program, I probably wouldn't have gotten in. But my heart took me to Baltimore, so that's where I ended up. And my first job out of school was actually at National Geographic. So within their art department, working with cartographers, illustrators there, writers, art directors, creative directors, researchers, editors. I mean, it was a huge concerted effort. So my experience there was actually pretty eye-opening as far as the type of team that I wanted to surround myself with, really high achieving, but humble people. And again, my background is definitely traditional in every sense of the word. So, in my time at Hopkins, I did a ton of surgical illustration. In fact, I think I lived in the OR for the most part. So that was the nice thing about that program was they kind of just gave you the surgical schedule and you can kind of show up to anyone as long as the surgeon would let you in the room. So my favorite medium still remains pencil on paper, Photoshop, Illustrator sometimes. So I certainly still do work like this, on the weekends and evenings. In fact, I actually still run an Out of My Studios, which is a studio I founded 10 years ago. We work with about 12 surgical illustrators, medical illustrators across North America right now. It's a very strong team. I have a very light touch with it. Actually, our current scientific creative lead, Jerry Gu, actually helps to coordinate a lot of those artists. So he's doing a fantastic job juggling the Anatomize projects as well as BioRender. But here's a sample of a really big surgical book we're working on right now. In fact, for Anatomize, just because BioRender is getting so busy, the only projects we take on are sort of in the 5 to 6 figure range. And that kind of brings me to why BioRender is important is because not all scientists have that kind of budget. Here's an example of an artist we're working with right now, Paul Kim. You may know him, extremely talented surgical illustrator. He's helping us out, but he actually is an art director at Radius down in, I believe, New Jersey. They're recently acquired, but I think is a testament to, the kinds of work you can still do, even if your career takes you down unique paths that might not be quote unquote traditional. By the way, if you are a surgical illustrator in the room right now or interested in it, we do have a few spots open for you to contribute to this massive hundreds of illustration textbook that we're putting together for an association. I think we're trying to wrap it up by next year, but if you're interested and have bandwidth, definitely reach out to me and we'll get you into the roster. So my kind of journey started again at National Geographic. Here's a silly photo of myself and another intern holding up that background poster. I think for most scientists, they like this photo because it shows how messy the artistic process is. For me, just looking back, I think the notion of reaching beyond medical illustration to apply my sort of skill sets that I learned in medical illustration as a master's program started at National Geographic. So I realized very quickly that the core skills we learned could be applied pretty ubiquitously. So an illustration like this that I was able to make with Nat Geo a couple years ago, applied the same surgical illustration techniques that I learned at Hopkins, and I'm sure you all learn sort of that temporal spatial awareness at BMC, cutting away layers of anatomy, showing what needs to be shown versus not need to be shown. Even basic things like, how to space text, negative space, highlighting using colors very sparingly, and making sure that in this case, the surgical, audience is very specialized. In this case, Nat Geo, 40 million readers a month, had to resonate with, 5-year-olds all the way up to 80-year-olds. So illustrations become obviously the common denominator with audiences like National Geographic. But in any case, I didn't think that what I learned in medical illustration school could apply to these sorts of things. And they quite naturally did. Even figures like this I made in Adobe Illustrator, but seemingly disparate, but quite similar. I mean, peeling away anatomy, showing what can't be seen with the naked eye. This is inside of, actually, does anybody know what this building is? If you've been there before. I have not been there. We were sent blueprints and video footage to be able to create this. Yeah, Ariadna got it. It's the Sagrada Familia building made by Gaudi. So when you hear, oh, that decoration is Gaudi, that's where it comes from. He was so ambitious that he didn't finish it. So actually the gray area is yet to be done. The colored area is done. So kind of like illustrating anatomy, like, coloring arteries red, veins blue. We had to kind of come up with our own color schema. But in any case, for some reason, my skills in medical illustration applied to this and worked pretty well. We got our Oscar of infographics of that year from the Society of Design, News and Design. But I can't claim to have done this by myself. This again was a humongous concerted effort. So my baseline work was made in Illustrator, if you're interested, and then we layered in watercolor layers. My co-artist doesn't use 3D, so we used 2D perspective within Illustrator as well. So lots of really fun stuff there. So that was kind of my foray into thinking, where else could my medical illustrator skills apply, outside of the realm of medical illustration? Obviously, going back into the medical illustration field eventually, starting my own studio, obviously still at arm's length with Nat Geo, leading the scientific illustration arm for them, but really wanting to go back into biology, realizing that this is the sad state of biology today. I see Natai in the room. I think those with a PhD also know very, very well that if you go to a conference, these are the kinds of figures that are presented for Nobel Prize winning scientists. And it's really disheartening because, people in the room are kind of trying to figure out, okay, what are they trying to communicate? But the quality of the illustrations aren't ever really questioned. And so as an illustrator sitting in the back of the room, this is when I was doing my research prior to starting BioRender, is like, this is the reality. I can't believe, I went to, an undergrad with science, and I sat through immunology courses where the figures were terrible, but I didn't think that this would carry through in the professional world, and it does. So that's kind of where we took off and started BioRender. So here's a quick snapshot of it. Some of you may know about what BioRender is. Some of you may have not heard of us before. Oh, wow. Some of you have used it in your undergrad. I mean, we're only 3 years old. So I guess if it was maybe your last year of school or last 2 years, that's amazing. I did not think that those worlds would collide here. Oh, wow. That's awesome to hear. Okay. So there's some recent grads here that may have heard of BioRender. We do have site-wide licenses at almost every major institution now in the US, Europe. Actually, for those that maybe have not seen BioRender before, maybe it would be worth, let's see, maybe I'll kind of give a really quick demo. I know we've only got a few minutes here together, but I think it'd be worth just showing you. It'll give context into why I think the skills of a medical illustrator will translate so well. This is the BioRender interface, but it literally took the work of medical illustrators, really strong team, to put together even brush patterns that could help scientists. So here's the interface. You can create a really beautiful endothelial brush. Some of you may do this already in Adobe Illustrator, but I think the level at which you would need to understand Illustrator to make a brush, say for a scientist, is pretty difficult. So we've created this brush pattern. I can't claim to have made this whatsoever. It is the ingenious skills of our developers. But, they ask things like, what's this pink line thing, and how many, strokes and patterns need to be filled across this membrane. So it takes the work of a medical illustrator to be able to obviously do that. So red blood cell. You can think of it as kind of like Lego blocks for science. And then the scientists, all they have to do is come in and, fill in the gaps here. So again, can't take credit for these beautiful patterns that are made here in Byrender. The work of medical illustrators is really important for that. Probably not a skill that you thought would be important. DNA brushes as well, something that I think is notoriously difficult to draw for a scientist. So it's kind of fun to think, reverse engineering what a scientist, how they think, what they even call things. Like this is a pattern brush, but they wouldn't know what that is. So we call this, a DNA brush. Even things like an enterocyte, things that are notoriously, again, difficult to illustrate, even in Illustrator, you can create in Byrender now too. So just wanted to give a quick, I guess, sneak peek into what is possible within the app. So things like pattern brushes. I know many of you are in 3D, so we've got a really beautiful 3D plugin. So you can imagine yourself, perhaps even taking on and project managing something like this, saying, what colors do you need? Actually, I think Jerry helped with the launch of this feature, applying different colors, skins, simplifying the sort of PyMol and illustration process. So it's a little more intuitive for scientists. A lot of fun things you can probably imagine, making tools for scientists so that they can better make figures on their own has been a really interesting challenge. It's a challenge in psychology, a challenge in visualization, communication, science. We can't just willy-nilly apply different colors to molecules because those have implications. So having that understanding, I think coming out of the BMC, you guys have a really strong advantage. There we go. Anyway, super quick sneak peek into Byrender. You can all, maybe play around with it later. There's a free version. It's free forever. So feel free to play around with that. So our mission now at BioRender is to empower the world to learn and communicate science faster through visuals. That's the core mission. Those words that are bolded and underlined is kind of the unchanging part of our mission. Our vision, if we succeed with that mission, is that BioRender will be the go-to trusted place where science is communicated. Very lofty goals, very big, challenges ahead as we try to help change the world and help shape the way science is communicated visually. We think that's the direction that the world is going, democratizing visuals. I mean, we're all on Instagram. I don't think the number of people on Instagram are as qualified photographers, but, the quality is quite surprising because they make it so easy and it's democratized. So that's kind of, our vision there with Byrender. So for those that are interested in, I guess, general startups, if you are ever thinking about starting a company, happy to talk on that. I can talk for hours on that, but for this one, I'll focus it on, alternative careers. But just to kind of finish off here on the history, we launched, almost 3 years ago now, if it's January officially. We had about a team size of 6, which I thought was amazing because if you think about, you have this idea, we've all had ideas for companies, I'm sure. Getting to a team of 6 was extraordinary for me. Number of customers, 10. I was so honored that 10 people would even want to come onto our janky little app that barely worked and crashed every 5 minutes. And then 50 illustrations. For me, working at Nat Geo, spending weeks or a month on a centerfold, this was, a new feat, a new achievement, 50 illustrations. I thought that was amazing, with zero help from a medical illustrator. Today, fast forward those 3 years, our team is 53, probably going to be 100 by August. And, obviously, shameless plug here to check out our careers page for applicable roles. Customers, we just passed the 500,000 mark. And I just checked last night, we've surpassed 2 million illustrations created on the platform. So again, this is obviously with the help of medical illustrators building the platform, but you do it once, and then that's disseminated to scientists all over the world. So I'm, super proud of this number. I mean, if you took every active medical illustrator in the world, which is probably, 300 to 500, if we're being really generous, and they spent their entire working days creating figures, I think it would still take 100 plus years to accomplish this number of figures created. So really big feat. I think that's kind of the impact that I was kind of itching to make, is that I really enjoyed making figures one-off in custom graphics, and I still do that continuously to this day. But I think the impact that we're making here, around the world in almost every country, is, I think, incomparable to what I could have done on my own. So with that, let's kind of jump into a couple of alternative career paths, the kind of meat and potatoes of this talk. I think first thing to do is just a refresh, or a reminder of kind of the traditional, I guess, quote unquote, fields you can enter and are still very promising fields. I'm preaching to the choir here, so I won't go into it, but even 2D, 3D animation, I would lump into more of a traditional field now because it's so well known. Obviously extracting, distilling what are those common skill sets. If you shake the tree, what's kind of left on the branches. And I think those are, critical thinking, having a creative eye, unique multidisciplinary strengths. So you can actually chameleon to talk to different disciplines. And you probably didn't know you had the skill. You will know if you get the chance to apply it and speak with, developers, designers, non-scientific creatives. Being detail oriented. Oh my gosh, like all of you BMC grads, the applications we get when I used to grade the Vasilius Trust scholarships too, it just, you all stood out so much from the crowd. I obviously it's thanks to your incredible professors and the training, but it's incredible. Either the selection process is very good, or the training is great at BMC. So I would say it's pretty ubiquitous, no matter who we speak to at the BMC. Either current students or alumni. So first role, and again, I'm going to go through a couple of roles here, but don't quote me on these. It's going to vary quite a bit from company to company, from sector to sector. I had my lead recruiter and HR specialist help me with some of the roles here, because even I'm learning about what are these buzzwords, what are these new fields coming up in the space of technology that maybe we might not be aware of. But I'm just going to throw at you some words that you can later take and Google yourself and say, never heard of this job title before. What skills do I need? Are those core skills I have applicable? And is it an interesting field for me to get into? So UX UI designer, I think this is pretty self-explanatory. A lot of us know, this field. In fact, I think you guys have some really good courses or skills development during the BMC in this particular sector. But here's a potential career trajectory for that. I won't go too much into the details again, but here's a potential route you could take in your career. And again, it's very zigzag, right? You could start in UX, you could end up in product management, you could move to creative direction. It could be quite non-linear. So a couple of examples here of that. Oops, sorry. So pretty familiar, right? Creating ideal experiences for users, customers, patients, which leads me to the idea of UX research. Obviously we understand it from a medical science point of view. And I think more and more can be, I guess, crossed over to the tech sector, where I guess, salaries could tip a little towards a higher bracket, just because you can demand slightly higher salaries in tech companies. But here's I guess, traditional or natural path, perhaps, for a UX researcher. But, don't take my word for it. I asked a couple of my colleagues who are successful, quote unquote, non-traditional medical illustrators working out in the field now. And many of you may know Matan, kind of trailblazing the way for medical illustrators in the sci-tech world. So he's the head of UX at BenchSci. He's provided a really interesting quote here. I won't read it, but you can screen cap it and read it later. I think it's really insightful as far as how to get into the field of UX. This is really interesting. Find a real problem people are facing. This is something that I didn't learn, I think, in my educational training. Was you get to explore different media, work with different partners and institutions. but I never really got to apply what I did to the real world. And that's when you start to get a ton of feedback. And I think to enter this field, you have to come in with an open mind and be open to feedback and changing what you preciously created. It's always going to be iterative. He also recommended an interesting course. I can actually link all of these at the end of the talk. I've got it sort of on the side here, but I can't exit my screen. Oh, maybe I can actually. But he said this was a free course, actually. Oh yeah, here we go. Free course you can take on Coursera that he found might be helpful for you if you want to explore the world of UX. Okay, product design. So I think this is also something that's very well understood. Traditionally, actually, more for like physical products, like designing, I don't know, a medical device or product packaging. But more and more now, obviously, product design is a little more in the digital realm. Here is a potential career stream for a product designer. But again, this is very not set in stone. Like it could, again, be very non-linear to get down to even become a product designer and, eventually maybe VP of product design. The trajectory is quite different depending on the company. And again, it's a little more for digital products. For Byrender, of course, our product designer thinks about, where to place the library. What order do you show the buttons in the top row? Is it shapes first? Is it colors last? Do people read left to right the same way they do books inside an application? I think the skills of medical illustrator, kind of problem solving visually, would apply really well to this world. Okay, so just kind of get the wheels turning about other potential fields you could enter. Actually, one of my good friends, Leslie Preety, was a BMC grad and is now a senior product designer at Shopify. Obviously not in the scientific realm, but still applying, her skill sets she learned in the BMC. So her quote is, the skill of breaking down complex problems or information into understandable bits transfers well from biomedical communications to product design. I think many of you may be part of this community already, DesignX. This is really interesting. So it's actually a nice community of, UX designers, UI designers, product designers, people interested in design, just getting into it. So I think there's a Slack channel too. I usually go on there for hiring and recruiting. I'm sure you can all poke your head in to see if there's anybody interesting there for you to maybe find a mentor with. So that's from Leslie, and she's finding great success in product design. I think she has, prior to Shopify, 7 years to 8 years experience at Autodesk. So that was a little bit more in the scientific realm, Autodesk being a little bit more of a scientific technical software company. But you can see, branching even, I guess further out from BMC, but still at the core of its roots, being rooted in, complex problem solving using different languages. Okay, so product management. This is, I think, one of the most exciting fields to get into, not just from, it being a quite a lucrative, I guess, career path, quite unknown as well. It doesn't sound like a fancy title, but it's quite competitive to get into, especially in larger tech companies, say like Google. The starting path for a product manager is quite varied as well. There's no set educational path that makes you the perfect PM. I would say sort of an obsession with the user experience and thinking from the user's perspective. So if you are in patient education, where you're constantly thinking from the patient's point of view, the patient's family point of view, those are skills that will cross very naturally into, say, a world of PM. So PM is not project management, it's very different. Even the salary brackets are quite different between product management and project management. So again, just buzzwords for you to stew on, and you can kind of look those up as well. Oh, and here was that course, sorry, that Matana talked about. One other one I wanted to highlight is product education. This is sort of a new field coming up as well. I think traditionally, in the realm of e-learning, instructional design, again, patient education graphics, creating educational material for then someone else to learn from, translates really well into educational material for how to learn how to use products. So even for BioRender, we're developing something called a learning hub, where you can teach about science communication tips. How do you label a brain diagram properly? For us, it's common sense, but for scientists, they need to understand, the leader lines have to be parallel to the labels. Use the little line with the dot at the end versus, an arrow, for example. Things like that would translate very well into this field, product education management. So kind of a new buzzword that you may not have heard of, and you can kind of look up as you're going through, career paths and jobs throughout your time at BMC and after. Service design is also a relatively new buzzword. I think it's probably pretty well known through the BMC just because of your connections to companies like, Coactuate and Bridgeable, companies doing really cool things with experience design. And, a potential career trajectory for such a person. But again, this is just one line of multiple lines you could take to get into this field. I actually reached out to Savannah Jackson, who used to work with BioRender. She actually helped launch BioRender in our early days. And then she moved on to become a service designer at Bridgeable. And her quote was, "It's kind of like UX design, but instead of designing apps, we bring patients, doctors, and organizations and businesses that serve them together in a room to help design the ideal experience." So, obviously hugely applicable from your experiences at BMC. So moving away from, I guess, drawing pretty pictures, but, applying those basic skills to really make a huge impact on the patient experience in this case, for the most part. She gave a good website here, www.practicalservicedesign.com, if you're interested to learn more about it. And then, of course, Bridgeable has more information on their website. All right. Last thing here I'll kind of highlight is the notion of artistic and creative direction. So I think this is one that, we all go into medical illustration and then we kind of hope one day that we'll be the art director for a studio or something. I think that's kind of what I, in the early days, thought that I would be doing, because that was kind of what I thought was the natural path for a medical illustrator. Obviously, that does still exist. There are agencies you can join to follow this career path. But it's actually taking on more and more of a new meaning in the tech sector. So now it's not really centered around directing of marketing and commercial products, say in an agency setting for pharmaceutical clients. I can speak firsthand from BioRender. It's actually a little more towards, creative direction of a product, the entire experience, and then the content therein. So here's a potential career path, even at, BioRender or similar digital product companies that you could expect to experience if you enter. Again, very zigzag. In fact, I have a really good example of a successful person here at Byrender who has coursed through many different experiences, but at the core, Jerry Gu, many of you may know him. I think he's very heavily involved with the BMC Alumni Association. He says that the most helpful skills that I felt the BMC program provided was an aptitude for effectively discussing science. Regardless of topic, my understanding or lack thereof, or the conversation partner. This has given him the confidence in various projects over the years at BioRender, where he can juggle through different roles and collaborating with, many different stakeholders, including academics, industry scientists, developers, and designers. Jerry actually started as a CX, so customer experience and UX researcher, and then flourished to start to manage a few individuals. And then his management skills kind of took off. I don't think he even knew how good of a manager he could be until kind of testing the waters to see if he would succeed in that. And now he leads a team successfully of almost 10 creatives, including PhDs who are, we call them science designers. They put together templates using the icons that the illustrators make. So I've shown you different career paths, sort of linear career paths, but again, you can, jump those lines and perhaps branch into other fields that you probably didn't know about. but really thinking about that core, skill set that would translate amongst those is key here. So I've kind of laid out some of the ones we talked about, others that you might want to Google later to look at, what are these roles. In fact, for me, I'm learning every day, what is a customer success manager? I had no idea what that was when I started BioRender, but it's actually one of the most important roles and can be quite lucrative. I'm only presenting roles that I know can get you into like the 6-figure plus range if you are successful in them. So that's why I'm presenting them to you as potential promising career paths, particularly, again, speaking from the tech sector. And, we already spoke about this, but sort of salary bands, what can you expect in each role? It is quite varied. So I didn't want to commit to any specific numbers, but obviously it'll range depending on if you're working in a technology sector, agency, experience with different software, and level of experience. So looking ahead, I guess the takeaways here are, really think about what is that itch that you want to scratch? What drew you into medical illustration in the first place? What part of MedIll excites you the most? I've talked to, I guess, several of the alumni in the BMC. So if you start in science, I tend to notice that they lean a little more into the arts because that becomes kind of the shiny object. So maybe you want to go a little bit more into the arts. And then vice versa. If you start in the arts and then you discover biology, you actually have this newfound appreciation for bio. So I don't know if you all resonate with that. Also be open-minded to exploring new opportunities and talk to people who are finding success in these alternative careers. Don't listen to people who may not have had the experiences firsthand. You can, hear down the grapevine how the experience was, but really talk to the individuals who are finding success in the role. That's where you'll get some, firsthand stories. Maybe consider a 3-month internship. What have you got to lose with companies in a specific new area that you want to explore? And then along, dovetailing from that, really tailor your resume portfolio with language that resonates with your specific employers. So I get applications that say, hey, this is my MRP. And our recruiter has no idea what that is. And she'll ask me, what are they talking about when they say MRP? It's a master's research project, and they still don't know what that means. So try to boil it down, again, to those basics. What are the transferable skills that I can communicate to an employer that I have? And you'll be surprised how much you do have if you break it down to the, to the basics. Great. So the last, I guess, minute here, I'll wrap up is, current opportunities at BioRender. Here's the plethora of those. You can just go to our careers website. And just a shameless plug again about BioRender. We're growing really quickly. We were recently voted one of best workplaces in Canada in the tech sector. We recently had some cool guest speakers as well. You may know Dr. David Goodsell, who's a very close mentor of ours, walking us through that process of building BioRender. And then we had the founder and CEO of GitHub, former CEO of GitHub, Tom Preston Warner, come and talk about how, seemingly disparate fields can come together and build successful products like BioRender. And we were recently featured in Nature as a go-to software for scientists. So just a couple of feathers in our cap to say that, the reception from the scientific community has been overwhelming. So thank you so much for listening to me blab on. Happy to answer any questions if there's time. I think I'm a little over though, so I'm not sure if want to reserve it for another time. Let's see.
Thank you so much, Shiz. We really appreciate that. That was super comprehensive. And so really, really thank you. We are a little short on time, so I'm just going to ask the first question so that you can answer it live.
Sure.
I know there's like quite a few other questions, so I think maybe we'll just move that like off video. So Shiz, if you want to just directly type the answer to them after, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll hang back and just answer them.
Yeah.
Sorry for going over.
It's no problem. That was super comprehensive. I'm sure everyone found it super informative. So the first question is from Chelsea, and I'm going to reframe it a little bit. So what are your sort of like top key takeaways on how to advocate or position for a medical illustrator, the soft skills to people who don't really know about the value we bring?
I think it's really just translating using their buzzwords. So do your research on what soft skills they're looking for, and you can literally lift the words out of the job description they need, because that's the words that they're going to use. Literally, we do that too. We have a one pager with the types of skills we're looking for. We match it one to one with their application, and people are just going to, try to pattern match with the words you use. So
Okay.
yeah, hope that's helpful.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Shiz.